Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon to those of you who are joining us in the UK, the Caucasus, and Europe, and a very good morning to those of us who are coming in from the US. My name is Isabel McCrae, and I work with the Center for Geopolitics. I'm really excited to be hosting this event together with Restart Initiative. I think we're in for a super interesting discussion about Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Karabakh, the geopolitical context, and what's next for the region. At the end of our discussion today, we'll have time for a Q&A. So if you would like to ask any questions, please submit them by the Q&A box. And just to note, the chat feature will be disabled for this event. If you enjoy our program today, please follow the Center for Geopolitics. We're very active on social media, and we would be delighted to connect with you in the future. Now, I would like to introduce our speakers. First, I have Dr. Janine Mitchell, who will be moderating for us today. Dr. Mitchell is an international development and area studies expert in the South Caucasus and Turkey. She's the co-founder and executive director of Restart Initiative, an NGO founded in Georgia with the mission of building connections for development in the South Caucasus. In collaboration with the Hertie School, Dr. Mitchell also leads for the Economic Connectivity Armenia-Azerbaijan Dialogue Series, which is a Track 2 dialogue initiative. Next, I would like to present Dr. Arman Grigoryan. He's an associate professor in the International Relations Department at Lehigh University. He received his PhD in political science at Columbia, where his dissertation was a study of escalatory effects of third-party interventions. Professor Grigoryan has published articles on interventions, ethno-federalism, the relationship between war and democracy, and US foreign policy. And finally, we have Mr. Ahmed Alili. Mr. Alili is a researcher in international public policy and regional security of the South Caucasus and neighboring regional powers. Currently, he is the director of the Caucasus Policy Analysis Center, a Baku-based independent think tank working towards regional integration of the South Caucasus. He is also serving as a lecturer at the Academy of Public Administration in Azerbaijan on the role of non-state actors in regional security. So we've got an amazing panel today, and I will pass it off to Dr. Mitchell to begin the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. And thank you also to the Center for Geopolitics for hosting this important and timely discussion. It's an honor to be here and to moderate this conversation. I can't imagine a more appropriate forum for it. And it's really a privilege to be sharing the screen today with two experts on the region, Mr. Ahmed Alili and Dr. Arman Grigoryan. I am fortunate to have them both as colleagues in the Track 2 diplomacy space. So before we get started and jump into our conversation, I just wanted to give the audience an overview of the structure of the next hour and a half or so. I'll give some background on our event, and we'll allow each of the speakers to make about 15 minutes of introductory remarks. I'll give them the chance to respond to each other, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience as well as myself. You should see the question box in the Zoom, so please feel free to send in your questions as they arise, just with the caveat, of course, that we will not be able to get to all questions. So I thank you in advance for your understanding if we don't get to your question or if it gets consolidated with others. Also, please make sure that any question is befitting of an academic context and respectful of the fact that there can be multiple and differing perspectives on this topic. So with that, let's get started with our conversation on Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Karabakh. What comes next? In September 2020, nearly 3 decades of conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh escalated into full-scale war. 44 days later, a Russian-brokered ceasefire agreement between the two countries brought an end to the fighting, culminating in a military victory for Azerbaijan. Despite 3 years of international efforts, however, a full-fledged peace agreement between the two countries has remained elusive. Most recently, Azerbaijan's September 2023 military operation in Karabakh resulted in the dissolution of the unrecognized Nagorno-Karabakh Republic and a return to Azerbaijani control over Karabakh. Over 120,000 Armenians have left Karabakh since then, exacerbating a pre-existing humanitarian crisis among that population. The domestic and bilateral political dimensions of this new status quo in the South Caucasus are entrenched in a complex geopolitical context of alliances, roles, and interests involving Russia, Europe, Turkey, Iran, and the United States. So this discussion brings together two experts in conversation to discuss the current political and geopolitical context of Armenia-Azerbaijan relations, the prospect of a peace agreement, the future of Armenians in Karabakh, and what comes next for the region as a whole. And so we're going to go in alphabetical order. And with that, I would like to invite Ahmad to make his introductory remarks.
Thank you, Janine. Greetings to all of the participants. Very pleased to see Arman here. Would love to see all of you in on-site meetings. I hope that there will be a meeting soon, and it's a great pleasure to share a panel with you, and I'm very thankful to all of you for this invitation and to the attention to the South Caucasus. I believe the developments taking place in this region, at least for the last 3 years. I'm not talking about the decades leading to that. For the last 3 years, they become so quite complex and interesting, and I believe that there are a lot of things that we need to discuss, and very grateful to the Center for Geopolitics for this opportunity and their START initiative for this opportunity to discuss it with a larger audience outside of the South Caucasus. So the problems, like you introduced where we are, but I believe that that's also at the after the September 2023 events, we are in a completely new state, and I believe that I'm going to share the ideas that where we can move on from this point. And there's so much nuances that we can touch upon from the previous years, and I believe that the things are changing so fast that there are even many more points to discuss what happened during the summer, etc. But I'm going to talk about the problems, challenges, and the possibilities that can rise in the following months or years. And I believe that that's what we should be focused on right now. So right now, what are the main challenges that we are facing? The very first challenge is the lack of, it's not lack, but the platforms, the choice of the platforms. There are quite many suggestions that parties can be part of, but there are very various reasons why the parties cannot pick up on one platform. The existing platforms, conditional, we name them Washington, Brussels, and the Moscow platforms. They somehow could not work for parties, and I believe that Brussels platform was very close to organized one, but then there were certain issues, and especially Baku wishing to see Turkey as part of the process, Armenia trying to pick up on its favorite participants in the platform. That created certain problems and for the parties, and as a result, we are facing the problem where the parties cannot meet because there is no platform that satisfies all parties. But I would not say that that's going to be some sustained problem, and I believe that after the 2020 Karabakh War also there were some time that the conflicted party leaders could not meet. But I believe that this is some problem that we are going to be able to move on. Among the problems, this is the easiest problem to solve, frankly speaking. The other problem, the other challenge that we should expect in the future, it's about guarantors. Armenian side demands that the peace deal should be guaranteed by the certain countries, and there we have some problems. Again, Azerbaijan would love to see the Turkey as part of the guarantors if there are this concept. If at track 1 they accept this concept that there should be guarantors, but I believe that the Azerbaijan side wishes to have no guarantors at all in that, because it believes that it's part of the Armenia-Azerbaijan process, and any outsider, any outside power, they are going to come with their own political agenda, and that's going to influence it in the future. So that's why Baku prefers to have it just a simply Armenia-Azerbaijan process. And as a result, the guarantors, it's going to create, I would say, in the upcoming months, there will be a lot of discussions about these issues, especially if you, for example, if you accept that European countries, only European EU countries are going to be guarantors of this issue, then Azerbaijan would love to see Turkey in this part. Will Armenia accept Turkey? Or in the future, Russia, if that you had European countries and the Turkey as part of the guarantors, will Russia agree with that and say that these countries can be guarantors and going to withdraw from this process? And I believe that's going to create a problem in this context, because even if the peace deal signed, let's say in Brussels, Moscow still has certain leverages to make sure that this deal doesn't work in a the way that it was designed. Or let's say, even if you manage to agree that Russia, European countries, Turkey, all of them became guarantors, what about Iran? Iran, for the last 3 years, did everything possible to demonstrate that it has its own vision on the region, and it wants to be part of the regional process, especially with the transport logistical issues. Iran's voice was one of the let's say loudest one in the region, and in this context I believe that it's going to be very hard to ignore Iran also. So it means that either we are going to have everyone as guarantors or no one, and then the challenges are that how we can make all of these countries like the as guarantors of the process. So the best possible way is, from Baku's perspective, is to have a direct Baku-Yerevan dialogue. At first, Baku proposed Tbilisi, Georgia, as a meeting venue, but for the yesterday there was some new suggestion that the meeting can take place in the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So it's quite a new and I believe a very productive development in this regard. The third challenge that I expect in the upcoming months is like it is, of course, it's going to be about enclaves. It's a bit old issue, like frankly speaking, it's a bit surreal that we are discussing this as a problem, because in the list of the problems, it was like one of the before the 2020 Karabakh War. This issue was not even part of the discussion process in a way that they would say that let's first solve the problem with the Karabakh, then the solution for this issue will come automatically. That was the vision. But now we have reached the moment when we are talking about the future of the enclaves. So there are few enclaves, Azerbaijani enclaves within Armenia, and that is also directly linked to the Armenia-Azerbaijan border delimitation demarcation problem. So the thing is, Armenia prefers to have one map, 1975 map that Soviet Union General Staff would use. But from Azerbaijan perspective, this map, there are the maps, and especially there were problem between the Azerbaijan Soviet Republic and the Armenian Soviet Republics back in the Soviet times. They could not there was so many unsolved issues about the borders, because overall between 1969 and then 1991 there were certain maps drafted by various services of the Soviet Union, and only 13 of them were agreed by the Soviet Armenia and Azerbaijan, and as a result we have so many open questions. So but the essence of this issue is that will Azerbaijan have land bridges to its enclaves? If not, so it means that in the future, from a Baku's perspective, those enclaves might be used as something against Azerbaijan, additional leverage for Yerevan, and it might create additional set of problems in this relation. So that's why Baku is wishing to move forward and solve that issue as soon as possible. The final point, the final challenge that I expect is about the infamous Zengezur corridor. So I believe that in this context, there are quite many, we kind of, 2 months ago, we saw that there are some new developments because Azerbaijan, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, I would say, basically, they agreed that the portion of this corridor might pass through our Iranian territory, but that leaves Armenia a bit out of the project. But we are looking for the united and integrated South Caucasus, so that's why there should be some components that, and it's a very important component to build the integration of the South Caucasus. So that's why, there should be some ways of for the railway link to open. But then the main issue here, it's about the FSB troops, Russian FSB troops. And the Armenia, as part of the Armenia and Baku, they mutually recognize each other's sovereignty, territorial integrity and sovereignty. And as part of that, Armenia is saying that as part of the recognition of Armenia's sovereignty of lands, Armenia is going to decide who is going to protect, or there's a need of protection for this railway link or not. From Baku's perspective, the issue is a bit complex because the Russian troops already are there. So the Russian border troops, they are controlling the Armenian-Iran border. So the Soviet troops, Russian troops in 1991, they left the Azerbaijan-Iran border as part of the former Soviet border, in the border, but they never left the border in the part of the border in Armenia. So that's why now the troops are standing there, and the railway link passes very close to the borderline. And as a result, we have the situation that now it's kind of like the Azerbaijan should withdraw. Azerbaijan should say that there should be no FSB forces. So it means that Baku and Moscow might have a new challenge in this regard. They might stand face to face. It means that in order to win Armenian sovereignty over its southern borders, Baku has to start certain, let's say, go against the FSB troops on the region. So that creates additional set of complexities, and I believe that these are the problems, these are the challenges that we are going to face in the future. I believe that my time is up, so I'm not going to I'm going to stop here, but I believe that there are quite opportunities raising from this point, and I believe that during the question and answers will be able to cover this part also. So I'm going to stop here and give the floor to Arman. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ahmad. I appreciate you also looking out for time. You were under, just for the record, but as you say, this leaves us time to discuss these issues further in question and answer session. Arman, please.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Center for Geopolitics for organizing this important conversation. I want to thank Ahmad and Janine for participating in this. I am going to structure my remarks around the question, which will embed the conversation about geopolitics. And I'm not going to cover some territory that Ahmad already covered, but I'm going to make one particular remark. I think a lot of the issues and obstacles that Ahmad has identified as outstanding issues, I think some of them can be seen as consequences of one major problem, of one major obstacle, one major issue. And that is going to be my primary focus. And that major issue is the unsettled geopolitical context of the Armenian-Azerbaijani relationship. And as Ahmad pointed out, the tug of war about the choice of a platform or a forum, and the choice of guarantors for the potential Armenian-Azerbaijani peace agreement. I think the other issues, the difficulties in settling the other issues, the difficulties in moving forward with and making progress with regard to the peace agreement are derivative this unsettled context. So let me just make a couple of points as a preamble for that discussion. Now, when the ceasefire was signed in November 2020, people would be justified in thinking that a peace agreement is not too far over the horizon, because several issues that had been impediments for a peace agreement, for a peaceful resolution, had been solved, albeit through a war, through a lot of death and destruction. But these issues seem to have been solved. I mean, why do wars happen? Well, wars happen, as people studying international relations theory and causes of war will tell you, at the most basic level, because parties cannot agree on the balance of power. In other words, parties cannot agree on how a war would end if it were to happen, right? And once wars end, there is clarity on the balance of power, and the balance of power usually determines who gets what in a bargain, right? So it had become, the war had a fairly decisive outcome, and observers would be justified in thinking that this should facilitate a speedy resolution and a peace agreement. The other thing that seemed to be working toward a speedy resolution and was probably going to help a speedy progress toward it was the fact that as opposed to some previous periods of the Armenian and Azerbaijani conflict, there seemed to be no serious geopolitical contest. In other words, it was pretty clear who the top dog was, the 800-pound gorilla that was in the region, that was going to determine certain parameters of the agreement, and that is going to be the primary mediator and guarantor of the agreement, and that was Russia in the immediate aftermath of the war. In fact, for several years, there was the impression that the West has taken a fairly passive approach, and Russia was playing the most important role as a mediator and as a third party in the Armenian and Azerbaijani negotiations. And right after the war, it seemed like Russia and the United States, France, or Western actors were not particularly interested in getting involved. I mean, the Minsk group representatives went to Baku and Yerevan, but it was kind of a sideshow to the main events happening. And the importance of Russia's role was also highlighted by the fact that Russians were acting in quite close coordination and cooperation with Turkey. So that also made it look like there was going to be a fairly smooth path toward a final resolution. And this is also, for people who have studied international relations, this is easy to recognize as a situation where countries, the smaller countries who were the principal belligerents, did not have too many outside options. And in the case of Armenia, this was particularly important, because the agreement was going to be more painful for Armenia, and there would be more temptations for Armenia to seek other fora, to seek other allies. But that didn't seem to be the case, and the balance was clear in that regard as well. What also was clear was the parameters. It was quite clear that even if Karabakh status was not determined immediately after the war, it was quite clear that Armenians would have to moderate their expectations, and whatever status Karabakh received, it would be within the confines of Azerbaijani sovereignty. And the other issues were about demarcation. And even though this demarcation issue has become more important over time, at the time it seemed like, even if there were disagreements, those were going to be not too difficult to bargain and to come to terms with. And the third thing was the third important element was, of course, the overland communications connecting Azerbaijan with Nakhichevan. But again, at the time, it seemed like this would be implemented as well with the Russian guarantee, with the FSB forces being providing the security for that route, and there wasn't much that could go wrong, and there wasn't much appetite for resisting this process. I mean, but as the history of the last 3 years has demonstrated, obstacles emerged, and it has proven to be quite difficult to make progress. And I think initially one of the problems that delayed an agreement, I believe, was the issue of political power in Armenia. It was not clear what mandate the Pashinyan government had, and I think everybody was on a holding pattern before the elections in Armenia in 2021. But after that, things started becoming more difficult, and things became really difficult after the escalation of the war in Ukraine, escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. And what this did was a couple of things. I mean, it introduced uncertainty. And in the sense that it wasn't clear, or at least it seemed like it wasn't clear, at least from the Armenian perspective, that Russia could play that unchallenged role of a geopolitical patron or a strategic monopolist in the South Caucasus. And especially after Russia started having certain difficulties and the war became a protracted one, this uncertainty became much more profound in the minds of Armenian decision makers. And it wasn't simply uncertainty and fear that they may place a bet on the wrong horse. For some in the Armenian government and in certain segment of the Armenian political elite, it also seemed like an opportunity to get rid of the Russian influence in Armenia. It seemed like an opportunity to change the country's strategic orientation, or as it has become quite fashionable lately to call it, to pivot to the West. And it has been a steady movement in that direction, which has led to very serious confrontational, very serious tensions between Armenia and Russia, accompanied by quite loud and angry exchanges between various officials in Armenia and Russia, and accusations. And in fact, one was made yesterday by the spokesperson of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova, who openly accused Armenia of trying to change the country's strategic orientation without regard for Russia's interests. And Armenians, of course, have been accusing Russia of not fulfilling their obligations as an ally, of not fulfilling their obligations as a peacekeeping force in Karabakh, which actually seemed to become to have acquired increased or added credibility after the events that led to the exodus of the Karabakh Armenians from Karabakh, which seemed to demonstrate vividly that the Russians were not doing what they were supposed to do. But the Russians accused Armenia of recognizing Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan unconditionally, without any status, without any prospect for a negotiated status for Karabakh, behind Russia's back. And Russia traditionally had been in favor, or traditionally maybe is not the word, all along since the end of the 2020 war, has been in favor of the position that Karabakh's status should be should be postponed and a peace treaty should be signed without such a resolution. But essentially, Russians accused Armenia of presenting Russia with a fait accompli in that regard, and that's why they could not fulfill their obligations. Now, I'm not going to go into any analysis of who may be right or who may be wrong, but this demonstrates how far things have gone between Armenia and Russia in this regard. And in fact, it was even noticed by Western observers. The Washington Post published a column by David Ignatius shortly after the exodus of Karabakh Armenians, saying that Armenia's pivot to the West was quite poorly timed. And the question remains as to whether this pivot is going to lead to, and the resultant confrontation with Russia is going to, what consequences it's going to have, both for Armenia in general and for the prospect of signing a peace treaty and agreeing on a guarantor and agreeing on a third party, or agreeing on a forum where that peace treaty is going to be negotiated. And what we observe, quite interestingly, I mean, one other point I should make is that before the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine, before the war started in Ukraine, I mean, all along Russia's relations with the West, even within the Minsk group, I mean, it has involved some contestation, some conflicts, some disagreements about certain parameters, certain actions, etc., etc. But it never was this zero-sum confrontation between Russia and the West. I mean, what happened with the escalation of the war in Ukraine is that the confrontation between the West and Russia became zero-sum. And in every possible issue area where they had friction, where they had contact, the zero-sum nature of the confrontation played itself out. And as far as this issue is concerned, before the escalation in Ukraine, some Western observers or some Western politicians or representatives, diplomats, kind of warned Armenia to be careful with this and not to pin unrealistic hopes on the West if they make such a geopolitical U-turn. I remember the French ambassador to Armenia in the summer of 1920. Well, it could be, I don't remember now. It may have been 1921. When he gave an interview to Radio Liberty, the Armenian service, and reminded Armenians who rescued Karabakh in the 2020 war and was resisting all sorts of pressures from the interviewer to make claims that Armenia can rely on Western support or Western security guarantees, etc., etc. But this caution gave way to a more enthusiastic rhetoric about Armenia's turn and supportive statements, the statements that were supportive of Armenia, especially recently the O'Brien statements and statements by Samantha Power, and of course the decisions to supply Armenia with weapons by France, and France has also been rhetorically quite supportive of Armenia as well, and this has encouraged that movement of Armenia away from Russia and closer to the West. But the question remains whether the West is prepared to provide the necessary guarantees, the necessary security guarantees, and whether it is prepared to replace the current security architecture which Armenia is a part of. And I don't, and a lot of people, or some people, including myself, are quite apprehensive about this. But what is happening that is quite interesting is these embryonic signs of geopolitical realignment, and especially in the last few days, if you follow the statements from Azerbaijan, that is quite interesting. Those statements are quite interesting. In particular, Hikmet Hajiev, the aide to President Aliyev, made statements about Armenia's pivot to the West. I'm not quoting him directly, but he also stated that this geopolitical reorientation may not be a good idea. And also in recent days, there have been very sharp reactions to the statements by Samantha Power and by O'Brien, and criticisms of the US and France about their hypocrisy and about the dangers. And in the past, President Aliyev has also warned Armenia about plans for rearming and what consequences it could have. So the atmosphere now is not good, and everybody is still on a holding pattern with regard to the peace agreement. And I think the primary reason and the particular issues that are going to be resolved in that peace agreement, and I think the primary reason is for this quite intensified geopolitical competition and the uncertainty regarding the guarantors and the forum for a peace agreement. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much. I look forward to the questions and to the discussion.
Thank you, Arman. Before we get into the questions, and I'll take this moment to encourage those of you in the audience to send in your questions. I wanted to give you the chance to respond to any particular points or ask any questions to each other based on your opening statements.
While Ahmad is thinking, I have one. I'll go first. This issue of issuing, just foregoing any third parties and engaging in a direct dialogue and doing it just between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I mean, in principle, I think there is a lot to be said about that. That would be positive. And I especially agree with Ahmad's observation that when third parties get involved in those conflicts, they're not necessarily solving the problems of the belligerents, of the conflicting parties. They're also solving their own problems. In fact, I would like to remember something that quite a while ago, Girar Libaridian said about the Minsk group behavior in the negotiations in the 90s. At one point, he, in a very exasperated tone, he said, myself and the Azerbaijani representative had become mediators between the mediators. So the mediators had their own conflicts among themselves, and quite clearly, the reason for it is because the mediators have their own stakes and their own interests in how this conflict would be resolved, and those interests are not always the same as the interests of the parties themselves. Having said that, I think it is also an unfortunate fact that now we have a very asymmetric power situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and whatever bilateral agreement is achieved, Armenians have legitimate fears that these agreements may not be respected, and Azerbaijan would have incentives to renege and exploit its power advantage. Every time some unanticipated disagreement happens between the countries, Azerbaijan will get to interpret it in ways that it favors, and given its power advantages, it will be able to coerce Armenia into new concessions. So I think that is a reason for being a bit skeptical about just the bilateral agreement and foregoing the help of mediators or third-party guarantors. The second point I would make about that is that it might not be up to Armenia and Azerbaijan. If some third party among the ones that we've been discussing, if they win the geopolitical contest and decide that they are going to guarantee the peace, I don't think Armenia and Azerbaijan are going to be in a position to say no to them.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I believe that Arman just perfectly, his explanation was very close to the explanation discussions taking place right now in Azerbaijan among experts, and I believe that the experts on the subject, they would, in Azerbaijan, they would repeat exactly what Arman said right now. And in this context, I would say that this issue that there is a very skeptical approach in Armenia that the peace deal might be the end the things, and it can lead to the peaceful coexistence. I can tell that this one, the peace deal is going to be the beginning. After the peace deal, at least there is a track to diplomacy is needed to make sure that there is a much sustainable context established between the societies that might lead to the more positive peace. So right now we are working both societies, Armenian Azerbaijan society and international community, the progressive forces in international community. The aim is to have any peace. So then we can think about how we are going to turn it into positive peace. So that's why reaching any peace is the goal right now, with all the defects it's going to have, with all the shortcomings, with all the things that we would love to fix. But right now the aim is to reach the threshold. Then we can think that we don't like it. We have to make sure that there is CBMs to increase trust within Armenia toward the Armenians are going to believe that this peace deal might hurt them in the future. But I can tell you why Azerbaijan is in hurry for the last 3 years, and I believe that Azerbaijan was very insistent on moving things forward. It's because of the neighborhood. You rightly mentioned that all of the mediators suddenly at some point they might have their own geopolitical and the political agenda about the region, and some experts on the subject in Azerbaijan, they even talk about the management of the region through conflicts, so that the conflicts might be one of the main tools for the external powers to shape the agenda within the region. So that is why Azerbaijan and the experts on the subject in Azerbaijan, reaching the peace deal is the priority than some points within the peace deal. But again, once we reach that deal, there are a lot of issues to work on. And Azerbaijan is willing to reach it, because if this wound is not covered with even in a very thin paper called a peace deal, the others might use it. So just to finalize, close this chapter, then move forward, because right now Azerbaijan wants to be part of the other geopolitical agendas. For example, the so-called middle corridor. Azerbaijan is very much focused on that. The future of the Azerbaijan geopolitical vision is that. And any problem left with Armenia might in the future create additional problem. So we are the region under pressure, and we believe that even a small rifts, when you're under pressure, that can cause a blast. So that is why Azerbaijan wants to get rid of that rift. But again, there are other geopolitical projects that Azerbaijan wants to be part of, and after that, I don't believe that Armenia or Karabakh issue is going to be is going to have the top position in Azerbaijan's foreign policy vision. So that's what I can say.
I have some things to respond to, but I'm going to hold off for now, and I'll probably talk about these things in the context of questions that Janine and others will pose.
Ahmad, did you have a question or a point that you wanted to bring up with Arman based on his introductory remarks? No pressure.
I would say very I would say one issue from Arman's perspective, and he has very objective academic perspective, so that's why I would love to get his personal perspective on the issue that what has changed for Armenian foreign policy after the 1920 September 2023. So there were a lot of changes after the 2020 war, I would say that changed a lot of war. That war changed a lot of things. But what kind of new elements or what kind of old elements they left Armenian foreign policy vision with the September 2023 events? Anything like because frankly speaking, there are right now the sides they have chosen there is a certain pause in the process, and you don't see them talking and clashing each other. So that's why you don't see the precise change in this position. So what are these changes in Armenia's foreign policy vision after 19 and the 20th September 2023? Thank you.
When I started my remarks, I said the conversation about the peace treaty and the negotiations leading to the peace treaty should be seen as derivative from a different context. And I think something similar can be said about Armenia's foreign policy and how it is related to the negotiations with Azerbaijan. I'm on record in Armenia in a couple of interviews, in a few interviews, and some written statements saying that, this is not a secret for people who know me and who have followed my writings and interviews in Armenia. I have been very critical of the Pashinyan policy, the Pashinyan behavior, the behavior of the Pashinyan government, and I hold them responsible for the very poor decision-making that led to the war, and some poor decisions after the war as well. And I think what they have decided, and this is something that I have argued in an academic paper, is quite characteristic of revolutionary governments and revolutionary movements. They like chasing grandiose ideas, big ideas. They don't like to manage things and just manage the daily business of foreign policy or solve problems as they arise. They do like having grandiose big visions. And I think even if these ideas about changing Armenia's strategic orientation toward the West were present in the part of the political spectrum that supported Pashinyan before the war, after the war this has been strengthened, because the behavior of Russia was interpreted by this segment of the Armenian political spectrum as fundamental betrayal, and after the war there has been this very intense conversation in Armenia and intense effort in Armenia on the part of these people to argue and to demonstrate to the public that it's a losing proposition to stay in an alliance with Russia. We don't gain anything from it. Russia didn't support Armenia in the war, and it is applying coercive pressure on Armenia for other things. So it is best for Armenia to change its strategic orientation and to be part of the more modern, democratic, and to be part of the West, which has all sorts of advantages, according to them, both geopolitically and in terms of the values that they espouse, political values that they espouse. I think this is a very risky strategy, and again, I think the decision to postpone and to prevaricate on certain issues having to do with the negotiations with Azerbaijan is also a consequence of this. And I think this move, this geopolitical pivot is an ill-advised one, I think. And even when Western observers are making that claim, as I pointed out in the case of David Ignatius, and some others have made similar arguments too, I think it is probably advisable for the Armenian decision makers to take that seriously. But I think the primary issue, the primary agenda from which other things flow for the Armenian government, for the Pashinyan government after the war, has been to change the country's strategic orientation.
Thank you. So I want to jump in now with some questions for the audience that talk about some of the regional actors, namely Iran, Turkey, and Russia. So there's a question on how Turkey and Russia balance their antipathy to each other and their support to Azerbaijan. And also a question about the role of Iran in relations with both Armenia and Azerbaijan since the September events, and whether we've seen a change in the role that Iran is playing or will play in the region. Ahmad, would you like to start with that?
Yeah, thank you. So the question about basically about the role of Turkey and Russia, and then additional question about Iran, right? So 3+3 countries, the position of the non-Western powers in the region. Okay, yeah, this is very interesting. I would say that I'm not going to prognose anything on this regard, because whatever happened for the last couple of years is already interesting, and I believe that it's quite revealing in this context. About Turkey and Russia, this should be understood that there is a very big love and hate relations going on right now with these countries. They are the natural competitors, and especially if we are talking about, this is a Center for Geopolitics event, and that geopolitics demands to look to the certain issues, like the certain repetitive, the certain patterns that takes place in the history. And we would say that like the Turkey and the Russia, they were like at least the several wars that took place between these countries. And I believe that the Black Sea and the South Caucasus was one of the the places, Balkans. These were the areas where the most of the fighting took place. So that is why it would be naive or very simple to say that, well, there is some only love component existing this, but there is quite a big strategic competition taking place. And I would say that competition, for example, in Ukraine, also in the very first few months, the Russian Turkish Bayraktars, they were very important and decisive for the Ukrainians to stop Russian advance in the region. So whatever the Ankara is saying right now about the war in Ukraine, their help was very instrumental for Ukraine for that period. And also the events like taking place in Syria, in Libya, in Afghanistan, in Central Asia. So might be from the view from the Cambridge, and it might be different from the South Caucasus, because when you have a view from Cambridge, from the UK, it's mostly like you are looking to all the south, but in the South Caucasus we are looking at north, south, west, east. So it's like this is the regions that we are basically physically we have borders with this region. So that's why the developments taking place in Syria, in Libya, in Central Asia, we feel it on our skin. So that is why there is quite a big challenge in this context. And I believe that the love component, the basic element of the love component, is not Azerbaijan, but on the Western sentiments that exist in Turkey and in Russia. So there are certain elements that pushes both of them toward each other, and I believe that the problems that they have with the European Union countries and with the United States, they kind of creates them quite a useful platform for them to cooperate. So that's why I would not say that Azerbaijan is the place that they find, let's say, they decide to cooperate. About Iran, I would say that this is a very interesting case. Iran is for Iran. it lost South Caucasus to Russia early 19th century, and Iran accepts that Russia can be present in the South Caucasus. But any other power than Iran present in the South Caucasus, it's quite a big source of the if it was a person, I was jealous about. No, it's a country. So I would say that Iran finds very threatening the presence of any other country in the region, especially NATO countries. And from Iranian perspective, Turkey is not a country, and its presence in the region is there is no difference than the US or any European country's presence in the region. And in this context, Azerbaijan is the one that opens this gate to the Caspian basin's energy resources, to Central Asia. And in that case, because of this issue, Baku and Tehran from time to time, they might clash with each other. But there are quite a lot of historical bonds between these countries. And so after certain time, like I say, Baku and Tehran, because of these historical bonds, cultural bonds, they kind of find way how to solve their own problem. But as I always say, that when it's a good day for the Iran-Azerbaijan relations, expect for something bad. If it's a bad day for Iran-Azerbaijan relations, wait for something good to come soon. So this is this is very normal for the Iran relations in the South Caucasus. And in this context, what happened in 2020 that changed the balance in the power, balance of the power in the region, and as a result, Turkey gained a lot of influence. And that is why Iran is very active. So if, from Tehran's perspective, if Russia is losing some power in the region, the only country that should bring it back, have it, it's Iran. Iran doesn't want to let any other country to take to become the second country in the region, but itself. So I'm going to stop here, but there are a lot of issues to talk about.
Arman, would you like to
Yes,
weigh in on
just briefly. I mean, I'm in basic agreement with what Ahmad said. Just to add a few words to it and maybe look at it from a slightly different angle. I mean, if you look at the Russian-Turkish rapprochement, I mean, they are strange bedfellows. There is no question about that. There are few rivalries in the world that have lasted as long as the Turkish-Russian one. And for anybody who has basic understanding of geopolitics, they can see that these are two big neighboring countries with a lot of issues that they naturally are going to have disagreements about, or overlapping, or rather conflicting preferences, but at the same time, this rapprochement already has quite a bit of history. I mean, it's been going on for quite a few years, and it does have some depth and seriousness. So this is not just episodic. And the question is, what is happening? How fundamental this is? I think I agree with Ahmad that despite all their other conflicts and disagreements, the thing that they prioritize and which allows them to cooperate is the common discontent with the West. And this has happened. I mean, for Russia, there not much needs an additional explanation. Russia has been quite worried about the West's policies, NATO expansion, the expansion of Western influence, the EU expansion, etc., etc. And what Russia has systematically tried to do over the years is to find wedges. And again, this is not an accusation or a criticism of Russia. This is a standard approach and standard instrument in the toolkit of states in the international system, finding wedges in opposing alliances. And the policy toward Turkey has been part of this wedge strategy. I mean, they've tried to do things like that with France, with Germany, with much less success, of course. But with Turkey, it has been successful, particularly because Turkey has had its own very serious problems with the West. especially after the doors to the European Union were closed, I think something fundamentally shifted in Turkey, and the Turkish political elites, or parts of the Turkish political elite that were less bound by that agenda, less beholden to that agenda, have been strengthened and have been able to voice more of their discontent and criticism of the West over a number of issues. And I think this is the primary source of their rapprochement, and this is what has allowed them to cooperate. And I think there is some depth to it. With regard to Iran, I also agree fundamentally. There is one other country I would mention. Iran is, of course, very anxious and worried about Israel's increased presence and cooperation with Azerbaijan, and everybody and their best friends know that Israel's interest and cooperation with Azerbaijan is probably not probably is almost certainly dictated by their anxieties with regard to Iran and trying to find other allies and close partners against Iran. And as far as Iran's responses and attitudes are concerned, Iran is worried about this increased presence of both Israel and potentially other NATO countries. Iran is also worried about a situation where Armenia would be completely dominated by its neighbors, by Azerbaijan, and they have been quite vocal in their opposition to any sovereign corridors through southern Armenia, etc., which they consider the strategic interest for themselves. But one caveat there is that they are never going to do anything without cooperation with Russia or against Russian interests there. So whatever Iran does, whatever issues it has, it is going to be circumscribed by its concerns for maintaining the cooperative relationship with Russia.
So I'd like to continue on the topic of Iran, but move a bit to the unblocking of regional communications. Of course, this has been a much discussed issue since the signing of the November 9 agreement back in 2020. And as both of you have alluded to, one of the major issues between Armenia and Azerbaijan has been the connection between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan through what Azerbaijan refers to as the Zengezur corridor, through Armenia's Sunik region. I should note that the term Zengezur corridor is sensitive in Armenia because of interpretations of corridor logic. But this is a critical route for Azerbaijan, obviously. And it seems progress is being made for this connection to go through Iran. I wanted to ask, perhaps we'll start with Ahmad, what are the latest developments on this? And will this obviate the need for a road, or could it obviate the need for a road through southern Armenia? And does it actually relieve pressure on current peace negotiations by pushing the topic of a connection through southern Armenia down the road? So let's start with Ahmad on that, and then I'd like to invite Arman to jump in if he has comments on that as well.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I thought that I have a very few time left, and so that's why when I was giving my main speech, so that's why I was very quick on that issue. But I believe that even in that issue, I touched a few points there, and I'm going to elaborate on them. The issue is that the main problem in this regard for Azerbaijan and Armenia is that Armenian demand that the Russian troops, FSB troops, should not control this transport link. The problem is that Russian troops already are there. So if Azerbaijan says that I want anyone else So it's going to make sure like there will be a lot of problem between Baku and Moscow. So that's what like it might sound a bit planned for Pashinyan to make sure that Baku and the Moscow relations get a bit tense in this regard. So that is why the problem is not that this corridor, and by the way, from Azerbaijan perspective, like Azerbaijan used to use the word corridor because Azerbaijan is proud that there is a north-south corridor, west-east transport corridor. So when I was using an Azerbaijan official say that when they're using the term corridor, they mean overall like the line. So no the breach of the sovereignty of Armenia. And I believe that at highest level that was said by the Azerbaijan. It's a remark to your comments that, you know, this corridor logic might be a bit uncomfortable with the Armenian public. Just wanted to reinstate this position once more. So that is why, like, the problem is that Armenia has no sovereignty over the region that this corridor is going to pass, and it means that Yerevan wants to win the sovereignty over this region through as a part of the peace process. So should Azerbaijan get engaged with this process in this way, this is a very big strategic, let's say, choice. But I believe that it's up to Yerevan. If the Yerevan wants that FSB troops should not control or provide the security for that, it's up to Yerevan to ask Russian troops out of the region, and then many issues might be much easier in this regard. But is Azerbaijan how Azerbaijan gave up on this? Like, you know, doesn't Azerbaijan want it? I believe that Azerbaijan doesn't want to make it a one long process. As I said earlier, Azerbaijan wants to finish it as soon as possible because there are much bigger geopolitical threats and the geopolitical project that Azerbaijan wants to be part of. And so that is why, like, for Azerbaijan, like, the constantly listening to Yerevan saying yes and then no, changing its position on many issues, that's some in this time frame for Baku is kind of like the very unpleasant. Baku wants to move fast, so Baku showed that if there is a no quick move by Yerevan, there is alternative, and it is basically the same route, but the 5 kilometers apart from that toward Iranian territory, and the Baku is going to use that. But in reality, Azerbaijan wants all 3 routes connecting Azerbaijan to the Black Sea and Turkey. So the very first route, the well-established route, is through Georgia. Azerbaijan can reach Black Sea and Turkey via Georgia very easily. That's out there. And the second route right now, they started building it. It's through Iran. But I believe that the third route, so because the Azerbaijan is a landlocked country and its connection to the Black Sea and the Turkey is very essential for its strategic well-being. So that is why in this context, I believe that if there is some opportunity to have the corridor through Armenian territory also functioning, Baku is going to be very much interested in that, but not with the Yerevan being, let's say, picky on certain issues. I don't know how to name them. I'm so sorry if it's not the appropriate word, but that's the vision from Baku.
Two things about this, and I'll try to be very brief. This seems to be one of the issues that has proven to be very difficult in the negotiations, and it is true that one of the obstacles, one of the problems, and one of the anxieties for Armenia is the control of that route by the FSB. They are opposed to it. They don't like the idea, and now it is also true that there are certain tacit and not so tacit nudges from the West that Armenia should resist such a solution, such an agreement, which ends up putting the FSB troops there as the primary security providers for that route. Now, at the same time, however, there is also another anxiety in Armenia, which seems to contradict the first anxiety. I mean, they coexist quite uneasily. And the second anxiety is that despite occasional reassurances from Azerbaijan, from Azerbaijani officials, that this is not any claim on Armenian sovereignty. This is not an extraterritorial corridor. It's simply a route, and we use the word corridor as we use for similar other communications without any expectation that there would be a violation of sovereignty and limitation of sovereignty. At the same time, you do hear a lot of ambiguous talk from Azerbaijani leaders. They talk about things like, I mean, some of them have mentioned that Armenia should compensate for the occupation of Azerbaijani regions for 30 years by ceding territory, and that territory would be southern Armenia. There are all sorts of statements about that on Azerbaijani television, and let's not kid ourselves. We know how Azerbaijani television is related to the Azerbaijani state, and there seem to be some ambiguity and some inconsistency in the way Azerbaijanis, including some high-ranking ones, talk about their intentions with regard to southern Armenia and with regard to that corridor. And I shouldn't also forget to mention the insistence on returning the Azerbaijani refugees from 1988, and they are talking about returning 100,000 Azerbaijanis to the Sunni region, to southern Armenia. And again, if you put it in this context of the talk about the communications, that is a source of anxieties. Finally, I think on various points during these negotiations, Armenians have suggested alternatives to the southern route, to the Zangezur corridor, alternatives that would allow Azerbaijan to be connected to Turkey, and have argued that if that is indeed what Azerbaijan is interested in and what Azerbaijan wants, it doesn't have to be through southern Armenia. There are other alternatives, but Azerbaijan has not been very enthusiastic about these alternative proposals.
So I have a question from the audience that first I'll pose to Arman and then ask for Ahmad's perspective on it as well. It continues on this conversation about infrastructure. I will ask you to keep it brief because we want to get to the issue of Karabakh Armenians, which is also an audience question. But the question, Arman, is about the Crossroads of Peace project, which Pashinyan has introduced. And the question is whether regional countries can take this project seriously, given the fact that Pashinyan is talking with countries outside the region. And then, Ahmad, the question to you is what Azerbaijan's perspective is on this Crossroads of Peace project.
Well, I mean, the Crossroads of Peace project, Armenians are interested in becoming a crossroads, and geographically the country is located very conveniently for that. The first problem is that Armenia is late to that game in a sense, because quite a bit of that work was done already in the 90s. With oil pipelines and railways, etc., that are bypassing Armenia. And the second problem is that no matter what you call it, and no matter what context you put it in, I mean, there is going to be the issue of guaranteeing the security of these roads. I mean, we're not at that stage where we can simply open it up and not have any third-party guarantees, any special provisions for the security of this road, because there are quite a few. There is considerable potential for spoilers, right? to act out and to cause problems if these projects are implemented without such guarantees and without third party presence. So I don't see why this would be different from the issue of the route through southern Armenia. This problem is going to exist no matter how you brand it, how you approach it, what kind of scale you imagine that such a project would have. In fact, the larger the scale, the more serious the problem is going to be.
Ahmad, what is the perspective of Azerbaijan on the Crossroads of Peace project?
A few comments about Armen's speech. He mentioned that there are other ways than the road that Azerbaijan demands. I believe that the northern road is quite convenient for Armenia because there are, let's say, from economic perspective, it's much more viable for them to reach that road and work with that road. But for Azerbaijan, the shortest possible way passing Armenian territory is the best way. And so that's why, and that the southern, the Zangezur corridor, it already, you have the old railway bed ready there, so that you're just going to use very minimal efforts to rebuild back that line. So that's why, from Azerbaijan perspective, there are quite many dividends that this road grants to Azerbaijan. But it can be that the Azerbaijan might be very interested in the southern Zangezur corridor. Armenia might be interested very much in the northern part that connects to the Kazakh Fialetova, I believe, railway. I might have the wrong names, but yeah. So it's good that all of them start working. So, and I believe that the whole potential of the regional the transport links are going to be used, and that's the optimum and the best way, I would say, in this regard. Regarding the Azerbaijan's view on this issue, I would say that Azerbaijan's view can be presented by the Azerbaijan officials, and they did. And it's a very fun story that once presidential aide Hikmet Hacıyev, he mentioned that Azerbaijan is no longer interested in and the route passing through Armenia. After 2 days, Armenian PM went to Tbilisi and they presented this, Crossroads of Peace project. So it was a very, like somehow like the moment that Azerbaijan says no, the Armenia comes up with the same exact project with a different name. So that's what, like, that also demonstrates that once one party says no to something, the other party is so keen to jump on that and they say that this is exactly what I want. And I believe that that's the spirit, frankly speaking, I would love to see gone. So for the bigger peace in the region. But it's exactly the same thing that Azerbaijan was saying for the last 3 years. And the moment Azerbaijan starts saying no, this project was presented in this way. But I believe that once it also helps Armenian public to talk about this issue and how beneficial it's going to be with them, for them also, because for the last 2.5-3 years, Azerbaijan been discussing that how beneficial this corridor is going to be for the overall economy. But in Armenia, they always were skeptical view on this issue. But this proposal, it kind of generates this proposal going to generate the needed the public opinion and approach in the society for this project. So in this context, I believe that it's a very positive one.
So I'd like to turn to the human dimension of what comes next for Karabakh. I think we would be remiss if we did not address that during this conversation. As I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, some 120,000 Armenians have left Karabakh since the September military operation, which is essentially the entire ethnic Armenian population in that area. Azerbaijan has repeatedly stated that Armenians in Karabakh have the right to both stay and to return as Azerbaijani citizens, but Armenian populations understandably do not feel as though their security can be guaranteed under those circumstances. So the question is, what can be expected of the future situation of the Armenians from Karabakh? And what real prospects exist for their return from the perspective of both countries? Is there, is there a theoretical middle ground that enables both sides to agree to return and to cohabitate? And what might be some first steps towards confidence building? Arman, would you like to begin?
Sure. I think, well, let me put it this way. Right after the war, this question came up in one of my interviews to an Azerbaijani program about Karabakh Armenians potentially being integrated into Azerbaijan as Azerbaijani citizens. What's wrong with that? It's they could live in Azerbaijan as equal as citizens enjoying equal rights. Why would Armenians not agree to that? And I argued that if there are, and why, the question actually was discussed in the context of the presence of peacekeepers and the need for peacekeepers and third-party guarantors for their security. And my response was that even if Azerbaijan had the best of intentions and if it behaved very generously and magnanimously after the war, without third-party guarantors, Armenians probably would not stay there. Armenians probably would not trust Azerbaijan's intentions given the long period of conflict and animosity, and they would be quite apprehensive to put their security in the hands of Azerbaijan given that history. Again, this is assuming a situation where Azerbaijan has behaved immaculately and very generously and magnanimously. But actually, Azerbaijan didn't behave very generously and magnanimously. And if you look at the rhetoric in Azerbaijan, at certain actions in Azerbaijan, this was something that I wanted to also talk about in response to something that Ahmad was saying in his initial remarks about reaching peace as soon as possible, and then the peace will be the peaceful agreement or the peace agreement will be the beginning of a process. I have a slightly different take on this. I think what Azerbaijan, the kind of rhetoric and the approach of Azerbaijan has been after the war. I sometimes talk about this in reference to the Versailles Treaty. It has had the Versailles approach, kind of an imposed peace on Armenia, and extracting as many concessions as possible from Armenia while this window of opportunity is open for Azerbaijan. It hasn't been a policy of reassurance, a policy of mutual concessions, and Armenians have made their own mistakes. But again, as I have also mentioned on other occasions, Azerbaijan as a victorious side had probably an added responsibility in this regard. As far as the future of Karabakh Armenians is concerned, I know there is some talk about creating conditions for their return, for their integration in Azerbaijan. I am quite skeptical about that. I don't see this problem that I mentioned about Azerbaijan credibly committing to treating Armenians of Karabakh equally and in a non-discriminatory fashion. And I also think now it has become a part of a different context, which is if Armenians have the right to return to Azerbaijan, Azerbaijanis have the right to return to Armenia, without going into the morality of these the moral issues of this argument. I would like to point out that given the current conditions, that such a project cannot add to the stability of whatever agreement Armenians and Azerbaijanis are able to reach. That is going to be a source of new instability and new problems. Again, especially given the asymmetry that exists between Armenia and Azerbaijan at this point. So I don't think I have anything terribly important to add to this, so I'll stop there.
Ahmad.
Well, several issues like in these days. What is about Azerbaijan's behavior? The Azerbaijan become master in finding precedent from the last 30 years, the history of the conflict, just a mirroring. So there is some misbehavior toward the flag. Here you go, you did this one in 1920. There is some misbehavior towards some, let's say, Vardan or someone else, Dilgam Askarov, and so that's why there are so many issues that Azerbaijan mirrors right now. So that's why it's one of the issues that how to approach this issue, but Azerbaijan definitely mirrors most of those issues in this regard. And about the return of the Karabakh Armenians, I believe that the first thing is about the threat, the danger, and the perception of the threat, perception of the danger. And I believe in this case, we have to understand the difference. According to the UN report, there are 51,000 people left in Karabakh. And the
51,000 or 15,000?
50-1,000. That's the UN report said, their first one, when they visited Karabakh right after in September, late September. So in this context, I believe that those people who are left in Karabakh, from time to time they appear on the Azerbaijan social media. The people that they are interviewing them, and that I believe that there is no problem for their well-being in that regard. Also, Azerbaijan made sure that the police forces enter Karabakh first, then the army. So to make sure that the possessions, the homes of this the Karabakh Armenians, of course, like that, it's very. There are differences in all countries that the police is more trained to be there is a certain type of the behavior toward the civilian objects. You cannot compare how the training police, the police training and the army training in this regard. So that's why the police went in, and right now there are reports that these homes are safe, untouched. There are a few homes that there are videos that people they went into these homes, and there are a lot of videos in social media. But these are the Azerbaijanis who own those homes before in the late 1980s. So when Azerbaijanis left their homes, Armenians took over, and that they are back there. So the rest of the homes, they are untouched. And I believe that this is also some positive signal to those Karabakh Armenians that they can return back. I don't know, will Azerbaijan government announce the time frame or not that for the next 2 years, 3, 5 years, these homes are going to be safe? If not, they can be nationalized and sold to the people. But I don't know what's the plan for it. But so far, these homes and the people there, they are in safe, and that nobody did anything against them. But I believe that it was very natural that Karabakh Armenians, we all lived through pandemics. We all understand that once your movement is limited to your home or to a certain small region, once you get opportunity, you just try to, get to the much bigger sphere. And I believe that Karabakh Armenians for the 9 months, whatever the reason, they could not live in Karabakh. And the once they made opportunity appeared, they could leave it. They used the chance, and I believe that it's very normal that when, for example, in Baku, and the Baku is a very seismic region, when you have earthquake, everybody leaves its home, waits for the aftershocks, and waits for the the emergency services to confirm that everything is okay. You can come, go back to your home, and everybody returns back. So after the 1920 September events, it was very expected that Karabakh Armenians are going to leave, but I believe that they are going to come back. I'm not skeptical about this issue, but the issue is that what's the number? Should we expect all 1,000 people to come back? No, I don't think so. First of all, 1,000, it means that there will be
100,000, you mean?
Yes, sorry, yes, 100,000, 100K, I wanted to say. So 100,000 people. Most of them, there are also officers, their family members, and the Armenian settlers from other countries. So I believe that the Azerbaijan estimation on the issue that I heard about 70,000 Karabakh Armenians. So if we expect that slightly more than half of those people might come back, and I believe that the last figure the Armenian government announced that the 30,000 of them already left Armenia, right? That is the Armenian government figured that they did not stay in Armenia also. They left Armenia they left to Russia also. So if we expect that slightly more than half of them are going to come back, so we can expect that around 40,000 of the Karabakh Armenians gradually are going to come back. And will it be, and I expect it to be basically around the New Year, because Azerbaijanis and Armenians are very much similar in terms of the mentality. And usually during the holidays, it's very the part of the Azerbaijan and the Armenian mentality that to go and visit the home, the graves, the cemeteries, and that might be one of the reasons why Karabakh Armenians might start looking for the opportunities how to come back, even temporarily, in upcoming months. And I believe that Russians are going to be very much interested in that also, because they would love to have some reason to, for their, even in a much smaller scale, to preserve their status in Karabakh. So that's why there are factors that might help the Karabakh Armenians return back to Karabakh, even temporarily.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Arman, I would like to give you the chance to respond to that if you wish. We are coming towards the end of our time, but I want to make sure you feel like you have the chance to respond to that, and then I'll open up the floor to both of you to make some concluding remarks.
I don't have much to say. I'm quite curious about how popular these approaches that Ahmad articulated in Azerbaijan, really, whether it is a genuine desire for such an outcome, or whether this is done purely for political reasons, for posturing. I'm not suggesting it is necessarily posturing, but it's quite interesting. I mean, one thing that also makes me skeptical about Azerbaijan's genuine desire to see Karabakh Armenians return, maybe because some people in Azerbaijan may think, well, we finally have had. This is a loaded phrase, of course, but we finally have had a final solution to this problem. Why do we want this problem to reactivate this problem, so to speak? Who knows what will happen in the future? Will Karabakh Armenians again become an excuse for aggression against Azerbaijan, etc., etc. So it's quite interesting to see how this is going to unfold. I mean, if Ahmad is correct in Azerbaijan's readiness to invite back Karabakh Armenians, that's I'm glad to hear it. Although again, it remains to be seen how many of them are going to be prepared to move back to Karabakh and live under Azerbaijani full sovereignty. What that is going to entail in terms of their full integration into the Azerbaijani state and society? Are they going to serve in the Azerbaijani army? Is the law enforcement going to be appointed and structured from Baku, or is it going to have some form of local autonomy to decide on such matters, etc., etc.? So all these issues remain to be seen, and I hesitate to offer very confident predictions, but yeah, it remains to be seen if a sizable number of Karabakh Armenians will find the situation safe enough and will feel reassured enough to return to their ancestral homes.
Of course, an hour and a half is not enough to delve into all of these issues, and I know we could go much deeper on this last topic, as well as a number of other questions that remain. But as we are running short on time, I would like to ask each of you to take a minute or so to share any concluding thoughts that you have, and then I will wrap things up briefly and turn them back over to Isabel. Ahmad, would you like to make any closing remarks?
Well, frankly, I know that we had quite a productive chat before the last 1 hour and a half. The other thing that I would love to add is that most probably we should have not prognosed anything. Like that we are in a time frame that nothing is crystallized. We are in the process of shaping these relations. And I believe that as part of the research community of Armenia, Azerbaijan, peace-building communities of Armenia, Azerbaijan, we can have a say on certain issues and shape the process. So, and I believe that in this regard, I believe that I'm going to be less skeptical and try to what I can do. Again, it's everything in a liquid state. Nothing is crystallized right now. So that's why I'm not going to. I'm going to make sure that I can influence the process even a tiny bit, and then make sure that there is some progress. Because whatever is going to we are going to have now, this time frame, it's going to set a tone for the next 30 years, 30, 40 years of the relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan and the geopolitical landscape in the South Caucasus. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will conclude with two things. So the first one is the first point I would like to make is essentially based on what my initial remarks were. I hope that this geopolitical uncertainty, this environment of geopolitical uncertainty, will be settled soon, because I think that's the primary reason why the process toward normalization, the process toward the peace agreement, is so difficult and so slow. So that's my first hope. And the second point I would like to make is that sooner or later, we probably are going to sign some, Armenia and Azerbaijan are probably going to sign some agreement. But I very much hope that the elites in both countries, the political and intellectual elites in both countries, start thinking about this very seriously and start thinking about not just peace, or rather not just a ceasefire, but peace as in the deeper sense of that term. There was peace. Again, I'm going to refer to Versailles. When Versailles was signed, a French general looked at that paper and made one of the most prescient comments in the history of diplomacy. He said, "This is not peace, this is a ceasefire for 20 years." And I hope whatever agreement we sign, Armenia and Azerbaijan sign, is not going to be a long-term ceasefire. It's going to be peace. And for it to be peace, we need to think about not just peace, not just coexistence, but reconciliation. I think this is very important. I think the next stage in the work for Armenian and Azerbaijani governments, for the Armenian and Azerbaijani expert communities and intellectual elites, is to think about what they need to do in their own societies to make that reconciliation a reality, to make that reconciliation possible. What it is that needs to be reformed in their educational systems, in their media, in the way they relate to this problem and talk about this problem in order to achieve genuine normalization, reconciliation, and peace, and in order to make sure that we don't just sign a ceasefire, we sign a peace agreement.
Dr. Arman Grigorian, Mr. Ahmed Alili, thank you very much for engaging in this conversation today in a constructive way, for sharing your insights. Thank you to the audience for sending thoughtful questions. And of course, thank you to the Center for Geopolitics for the opportunity to collaborate on this discussion. Very grateful for the insights that were shared here today.
Thank you very
Isabel.
much. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. Really fantastic discussion. For anyone who's attending, we've dropped some links in the chat for our social media, website, and newsletter. Please follow us, and we will also be posting a recording of this talk on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So thank you, everyone. Wish you all the best. Bye.